We live in an age where people spend a lot of their time online, sometimes a little bit too much time, but this is where people are. It's the digital continent, as Pope Benedict reminded us many years ago. And so we should, like the early missionaries, go to the missionaries of this continent. And so if people are on TikTok or YouTube, I want to be there spreading the good news. When I entered the Friars in 2011, I did that for 3 years exclusively, but then I moved to YouTube. So I've been doing that for about 9 years, and then TikTok, Instagram, some other things for the last 2 or 3 years. So whatever the newest thing is, we're going to try to be there and make sure that, if, as I said, if people are there, I want to be there. There's so much prophets of doom, as we said around Second Vatican Council. There's so many people that want to look for only the bad things. And I'm not going to be here saying that there's nothing bad about our world. Of course there is. And there's certainly some sadness and some tragedy of seeing emptier church and seeing scandals and seeing things about the church fading away. But I don't think that necessarily means that the church itself is fading away. And there are some opportunities here that maybe have not existed for thousands of years, where we are becoming the minority. We are living in a world that is not necessarily defined by us. And so that is sad, but it's also exciting that we get to go and evangelize. We get to meet people who have never heard the name of Jesus. And in fact, when we look around our churches, we know that there are no social pressures for people to be there anymore like there were maybe 50, 200 years ago, where you went to church because you had to go to church, because that's what everyone did. Now when you look around the church, you know people are there because they want to be. It's actually probably disadvantageous to go to church in some ways, and people are willing to overcome those social pressures now to come. For me, it creates a more rigorous church, a more dedicated church, and maybe a church that is interested in going out and making a difference. It's so hard to say. For much of our history, things change so slowly. But if you look back since, say, 1950, the amount of different eras we've been through and how quickly technology changes, how quickly culture changes, I can't sit here and predict what the future is going to be like. What I do think, though, is that I don't think we're going to snap right back to a culture that is defined by Catholicism or Christianity in general. That's not coming back anytime soon. But maybe we can find ways as we transition into this new identity where we can start to shape it in a way that we didn't before. Maybe we're not the ones who are in the city square running the events, defining the culture, but maybe we can be the ones who are subtly there, the ones who are making our voices heard in a different but maybe more meaningful way. I don't think there's necessarily a strength in small numbers, but I do think there's a strength in having to rely on Jesus. And when you have all the money and you have all the big churches, and when the future looks perfectly bright because of my abilities, it's hard to trust in Jesus. But by virtue of being small, by being weaker, by having less money, I think you look around and you say, this church is not going to survive on my abilities. It is going to survive only on Jesus's abilities. And it's from that, not being small itself, but from trusting in God, that I think we are stronger. History is so complicated, and there are always so many different stories to tell. And so I think that there is a story to tell now, which is that people are leaving the church. And there are a lot of people telling that story. It is a true story, and it's an important story, but it's just not the only story. Particularly in the United States, we can say that there are lots of different cultures, and there are places where the church is alive. I don't think we give enough attention to these youth conferences, both high school and college, that are growing and bursting at the seams, that have so much great faith and are exciting. Those did not exist many years ago, and so those stories need to be told, that there are things in this world that are actually growing. But I think there's also maybe a recency bias, or kind of a locality bias, where we look around at our own place in our own recent history and we say, well, look at the trend. When we forget that in Africa and Southeast Asia and Latin America, the church looks very different, and in fact has a very different trajectory. I come from the Northeast in the United States, where a lot of people are leaving the church that once was full. But the trend is very different in Africa. And so can we see globally that we are a global church, that actually the church is growing in some wonderful, beautiful ways? Yeah, so in some ways they're a newer church. Obviously the church has been there for hundreds and thousands of years in some capacity, but in the way that they're growing of late is a little different. And I think there's some benefit that needs to be given to the Second Vatican Council of allowing for enculturation and allowing for people to spread their own traditions and to use their own language. And there are some things that, for better or for worse, were very Eurocentric about the church that now open themselves up to people who maybe have a different symbolism and have a different way of telling story and a different way of celebrating. It's still the same church, it's still the same liturgy, but might we add something a little different from ourselves that now allows these people to take ownership in a way that it was there before, but is so much more full today. Yeah, what I see at these conferences and what I see as a chaplain of a high school and a college is that there are far more faithful people than we realize. And I think that people are afraid to speak up because they feel like they'll be alone, that they'll be the only one. But I found in just this past year working at the high school that there are so many people that feel the same way, that they wish there was more faith, that they wish there were more things, but they don't know what to do themselves. And when you look around and you realize that a lot of people are thinking that, well, then maybe it just takes that one person to step forward and take a risk and say, hey, I'd like to pray before school. Hey, I'd like to have a Bible study. I'd like to have some men's group or women's group. And you might be surprised how many people have wanted that all along, but were afraid to speak up. And so maybe what we need is some leaders to take that risk and to speak up, and you'll find that a lot of people are lined up behind you. There are hopefully some plans in the future I'm not able to share just yet, but I do think that evangelism has to be at the forefront of whatever I do. So it's going to be continuing online with some YouTube videos and TikToks and engaging people all around the world. But I think that there's such an important need right now to train people in how to evangelize. So often we think of evangelization in our imaginations as standing on a street corner and shouting through a megaphone or handing out pamphlets or knocking door to door. And there may be some benefit to that, but I don't find that to be the Catholic way of evangelizing. And so I found myself in the last year really committed to training young people and seasoned people into how to actually engage the people around them. I'd like to put out some resources in that way, and I'm going to be doing some big projects hopefully in the future about how to get people out as Catholics to evangelize.